Amen.
Hey, what's going on? Alex here, sitting on the side of the road, about to join my family at the beach, but I just wanted to talk to you about this idea of narcigesis, because I've seen it a lot in false teaching in churches today. And narcigesis is a term that I heard from a testimony of someone who left one of the biggest mega churches here in America. And exegesis, which is a different word, is the idea of taking the original meaning from the text and applying its message to our life today. That's the way that I try to preach. And I'm going to give you some other preachers who preach that way at the end of this video. And narcigesis is taking narcissism and mixing it in with another term called eisegesis. Eisegesis is putting your meaning and interpretation into the text, not getting the meaning out of the text, but putting yours in. And so when you do that, mixed with this narcissism that's mixed its way into the church, you get something called narcigesis. And I'll give you an example of that. But first, I want to read to you Matthew 14, 34 through 36. And this talks about why narcigesis even happens in the church today. They landed at Gennesaret. The news of their arrival spread quickly throughout the city, and soon people were rushing around telling everyone to bring their sick to be healed. The sick begged him to let them touch even the tassel of his robe, and all who did were healed. I'm going to dive into this passage more in the next episode of Amen Podcast called Healing. But just to see what's going on here, Jesus is on the lake. He's on the Sea of Galilee, which is just a big lake, and they come and they land in Gennesaret. When they get here, this is a very peaceful, serene town, but then that piece of that area is ripped away, because what happens? The people hear that Jesus is there with the disciples, and they say, "Get everybody, let's go. If you got sick people, sick relatives, sick friends, bring them. Jesus is here." Why? Because they heard Jesus was a healer, and all they wanted was healing. They didn't want him, they wanted his healing. They wanted what they could get from Jesus. This is why narcigesis takes place in today's church. We have a lot of churches who don't really want Jesus, they just want his stuff. They want even his morality. They want the goodness of life that comes with following Jesus and the way that he lived, but they don't really want him specifically. They don't want his heart. Also, there is a culture around Christianity, a very booming book industry, a very booming merch industry. There's business around Christianity. There's a lot of money to be made in Christianity. I just heard of a huge church network who they pay pastors to pastor churches, and then those pastors, once their churches grow, the overarching network takes a big cut from their church. And am I saying that's bad? Not necessarily. I'm just saying there's a lot of money to be made in Christianity. It's actually pretty crazy. And so you can get people who don't want him, don't want his message, just want what they could get from him. And so in today's churches, here's an example of a message you might hear that would be deemed narcigesis. David and Goliath, right? David is this young, unexpected warrior, and he's a little boy. No one thinks he can do it, and there's this huge giant, Goliath, and the Philistines are rooting for their guy, Goliath, to beat the Israelites. We are the Israelites. We're also the Philistines. What do you mean? Alex, I want to be David. I want to be the guy that slays giants. And that's what you would hear in churches. You're going to hear pastors say, "You are David. No one expects you to win. People are counting you out, but you are David, and you're going to slay the giants in your life. You're going to slay that interview. You're going to slay that next football game. You're going to slay that business proposal. You're going to slay. You're David. You're David." Or not David. Jesus is David. Jesus is the heir of David. He's born in Bethlehem, the city of David. No one expected him. He didn't have anything about him physically that people would be like, "This guy is a warrior." When they first saw him, they counted him out, just like David. But he slayed the giant of sin and death for us. We are the enemy. We are the Philistines. We're on the side of sin and death. We, in different ways, we worship sin and death. We praise sin and death by the way that we live. we're also the Israelites who are too afraid and too impotent to fight and beat sin and death on our own. We need a David. We need Jesus. You are not David. To hear that preached a different way is to hear narcigesis. And it comes from the idea of what Paul says in his letter about itching ears. Itching ears is this concept of these pigs back in the ancient world. They would have this disease that made their ears itch. And so they would find rocks to scratch their ears against to get some relief. In the process of scratching their ears, they're also damaging their ears. They're damaging themselves. And Jesus shows us that if we are not longing for him, longing for his message, we are like what Paul is saying. We have itching ears. And what we'll do is we'll find rocks or false teachers or narcigesis teachers and preachers who will go to them and say, make me feel good, give me relief, tell me what I want to hear. My ears are itching. And in the process of what you're doing is you're actually damaging your ears from being able to hear anything good. And you can become reprobate in your mind, which is what Paul says in the book of Romans. Just continuing to listen to the wrong things, you become numb to the right things, and you can't hear God's voice anymore. So what do? We have to have a change of ears, a change of heart. We have to learn to love truth, even if truth hurts. We have to learn to hear the truth, even if we don't want to hear it. We have to love the truth. And who is the truth? Jesus. He is the way, the truth, and the life. So how do we love truth, love Jesus more than we love ourselves? We have to look at Jesus, love us more than he loved his own life. He laid down his life so that we could have him, so we could experience the love of God in our life. And so what does that mean? That means that we must look at his life, and the longer we do, we will love truth more than we love ourselves. The more that we look at his life, the more we'll love him more than we love our own lives. And we'll be able to lay down our life and say, I may not want to hear this right now, but this is what I need, and this is truth, and this changes me. And you know what the promise is? The promise is when we do that, we'll raise to new life. We'll experience true new life, not the life that these false teachers are claiming that we're going to be able to get. Those are all lies. True life is only found in truth. And Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, who was risen from the dead. So he laid down his life because he loved us, and then he rose again. That means when we trust in him, we will raise again. Amen. I pray that this helps you. And one thing that you could just ask yourself is, okay, what is this teacher really saying? Is he putting the spotlight on me and what makes me feel good? He may be encouraging you, and that's great. There's nothing wrong with encouragement. There's nothing wrong with hope. But if he's putting the spotlight on you and making you the hero and not Christ the hero and not Christ the solution, then he's teaching narcigesis. And so who are some teachers that you can listen to that preach exegesis, getting the original meaning out of the original context and applying it to our lives today so that we can love truth more? I would say Voddie Baucham. I would say Paul Washer. I would say Tim Keller. I would say Adrian Rogers. And last and certainly the least, Alex Wilson. I try to preach that way on Amen Podcast. I try to preach that way here. But I pray that these helps. Write those down, and I love you so much. Check out the newest episode of Amen Podcast dropping on Saturday called Healing, where we talk more about this. And then also, if you want to learn more about relationships and how you can mend those relationships, check out our last episode called Mending on Amen Podcast as well. With that said, amenpodcast.com to support us and to keep us going. And I think that's it. I love you so much. Like, subscribe, rate, review, all that. I'll see you in the next one.
Amen.